Thank you very much, Momoko-san. Good afternoon and welcome, colleagues, to the third plenary session at this year's Recovery Forum. And this session is titled Accelerating Progress with Recovery Practice in Small Island Developing States. I'm sure you were treated to some very interesting discourse in the last session where we had the parallel discussions. I certainly benefited from the engagement in the room I attended. We're focusing on SIDS, and we know certainly that SIDS are known for its diversity, both in terms of size, population, geography, culture, language, and governance systems. Some of them are at varying levels of capabilities in terms of dealing with the challenges associated with their development progress. They're also known for their high level of vulnerability and exposure that predisposes them to natural hazard events leading to disasters from time to time, and also the vagaries of climate change. We see threats from environmental hazards, and these are increasing, not necessarily getting better as we pursue the development agenda in SIDS. And we've noted that they've been affected by various types and intense natural phenomena, from cyclones to hurricanes to seismic events, as you've heard from many of the speakers, volcanic eruptions, and tsunami events. Faced with the climate and geophysical challenges, the SIDS are actively and urgently seeking to push forward actions to ease the disaster events when they occur and to prevent them, but also to recover. And we've been talking about building back better, to recover better from these events when they occur. We note there is a shared understanding on the unique situation of these countries, and has made regional collaboration and knowledge sharing in many of these regions a reality that they have to pursue. In addition, we see efforts to unfold new financial mechanisms to finance not only the broader disaster risk reduction and resilience building agenda, but more importantly, to advance on the Build Back Better efforts. In addition to various established recovery governance mechanisms, the SIDS are challenged to approach recovery in an inclusive way that value culture and diversity, that values populations from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And to do so, governments have adopted pioneering strategies and policies in recovery process. Thus, learning from SIDS experiences are extremely important to advance our collective understanding on the way to balance efforts at environmental protection, at hazard mitigation, and also at risk-informed development. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we have 4 distinguished panelists who have joined us from SIDS this afternoon, who will be sharing their own experiences within the frame of the title of this particular session. As I've said before, we'll be focusing on recovery experiences of vulnerable states and how these experiences can contribute to improving recovery in countries with similar challenges, no matter if they're in the Pacific, if they're in the Indian Ocean, or they're in the Caribbean. Allow me, therefore, to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, I have Mr. Robert Ernesta. He is the Director of Risk Management Division in the Seychelles. Since August 2021, he brings with him years of experience from his military career in the Seychelles Defense Forces, which span over 28 years. You can find out more about Robert from our program. He has quite a distinguished career. Our next panelist or speaker is Mr. Mafua Maka. He is the CEO, the Ministry of Environment, Information, Disaster Management, Energy and Climate Change, Tonga. He is no stranger to us. He's been on a few panels earlier. And of course, Mr. Maka currently serves as the Director of the National Disaster Risk Management Office in the Kingdom of Tonga, where he leads the overall coordination of all disaster management and response activities. Most people in the region know Mr. Maka for his advocacy and efforts on partnership and on collaboration. Our next panelist, who is also not a stranger to us, not just in respect of today's activities, but certainly in the broader disaster risk management community, is Ms. Vasiti Soko. She's the Director of the National Disaster Management Office for the government of Fiji, and she's the first woman to hold this position and also a recipient of the inaugural 2021 Women's International Network for Disaster Risk Reduction Leadership Award. And last but certainly not least, we have, let me make sure I can find Ms. Michelle Forbes, who is the Director for the National Emergency Management Organization of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Michelle began her distinguished career in the public service for the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, first in 1991 as an air traffic controller at the E.T. Joshua Airport, but never gave up her passion for the natural environment and the sciences, which saw her eventually switching her career to the point where she now is a known disaster risk management specialist within the Caribbean with over 20 years of experience in disaster risk management, planning, and community-based disaster management and operations. And as I said, you can read about all of our distinguished panelists in your program. So let us jump right in to the discussion. Without further ado, I want to hear, and for you to hear from our distinguished panelists. And I'd like to begin with our first question for our panelists. And I will start from my left and go across. In your experience, what do you see as the biggest challenge or challenges in implementing resilient recovery in your island state? We'll start with you, Mr. Ernesta.
Good evening, good afternoon. Challenges, in fact, for Seychelles is not only in terms of resilient the recovery, but because of the geographical location of the islands. In fact, there is a challenge to daily sort of maintain the far-flung islands. So, and when it comes to disaster risk management and recovery, the biggest challenge is how to sort of keep all those far-flung islands under control. We need to have a recovery plan, and we have to involve all the communities. And communities can be situated 1,000 kilometers from the main administration center of the island. We have also to understand that sustaining commitment towards recovery poses a problem because it is, and it has proven to be difficult for government or for the Minister of Finance to accept that recovery is a long-term process and to budget the recovery efforts over a sustained period of time. So at the end of the day, the biggest challenge, all in all, will be the institutional capacity available locally. So basically, grosso modo, that is basically the main challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. And I'll move now to hear from Mr. Maka.
Implementing resilient recovery in small island countries is challenging due to factors such as geographical vulnerability, climate change impacts, limited resources, economic dependency, and governance issues. The isolation and connectivity issues, dependency on imports, and limited land for resettlement further complicate recovery efforts. Cultural considerations and the unique social dynamics of these siege nations must also be taken into account. I think to overcome these challenges, a comprehensive approach involving local communities, governments, regional organizations, and international partners is crucial. This approach should include adaptive policies, infrastructure investment, capacity building, and community engagement. Malo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you,
Vasiti.
Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess you probably hear the same comments coming from all of us, but there's only one thing that I wanted to emphasize on, and I leave the rest for my colleagues to cover commonality goals and ambitions that we have, or challenges that we have for SEEDS, and that's compartmentalization. There's so much compartment in the work that we do that even the institutions, when they come and support, they have their own checklist, and if you don't check the box for that particular institution, you don't qualify for that particular funding. Okay? I'll give one example. When we were doing, I'll give two. When we were doing the relocation SOP, and because this is part of climate change, the definition around planned relocation, the definition around slow onset relocation, it had to trigger climate change adaptation. But when you really look at the people who's doing the work, it's disaster managers. Okay? So there's so much compartmentalization that even when it comes to implementing on the ground, those that are doing the work has to adhere. Okay? And then the second component is that's not only is it within the institution, there's also within finance, as I said earlier. Well, I was talking to, just before I came, I was talking to one of the UN partners where we were talking about early warning system. And early warning system for us in Fiji, it has from end-to-end solution, which means the last end, the last mile. And the last mile for disaster management is when the disaster ends and everyone else is safe. But when we're in a room discussing early warning for all, there seems to be a lot of focus on infrastructure. There seems to be a lot of focus on dissemination of this. How about the users? If the users are not going to hear what you are telling them, it's useless. Okay? So for us, the biggest challenge is there's so much compartment. In other words, there's so much silo, if I put it that way, in the work that do that. It's becoming a challenge for us who actually do the work. So for this early warning for all, for Fiji, LTDD, when there's a cyclone, we have more people dying from LTDD than the impact of cyclone or wind itself. But we were talking to our partners, their stretch can only go as far as, okay, let's do a recovery plan. Oh no, we have to extend it because Ministry of Health has to come in. We have to ensure that everybody is safe, including the replication impacts of cyclone, which is LTDD. But some of our partners cannot go that far, cannot stretch that far. Okay? So for us in Fiji, it has to be that. That's the challenge that I see, and I hope that moving forward, our partners will start working together so that those of us who do both work, climate change and DRR, can start aligning ourselves in terms of our reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting, and I think it's something we will hopefully dig into a little bit as we go through this issue of fragmentation driven by financing. A very important point. Let me turn now to Michelle. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenge in implementing resilient recovery?
Okay, thanks, Ron. Some of my colleagues have already highlighted them, but I want to stress the whole issue of the limited resources, not so much the financial, of course, that's a big part of it, the limited financial resources, but also the timely finance and implementation of the programs or projects. We tend to use our Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, whatever you call it in your country, to implement a lot of the big development projects and recovery projects without realizing too that they are stretched. And hence you have delays in a year, 2 years, and you can't seem to get the projects off the ground or the programs off the ground. And that is a big, big challenge, of course, in my country. And we would have had that experience recently, even after the volcanic eruption, where we had to, depend on the same set of persons to manage these projects while doing other development projects. One of the things we often overlooked is the whole expectations from the community. And there's instances where communities refuse a recovery program or project because they were not involved in the decision making as to what they were going to receive or the type of housing, in particular, whether it's prefab or not. Because if you have a culture of not using prefab housing, then you can have some pushback in terms of the community. And to stress what one of my colleagues said earlier, the whole absence of the recovery framework to drive that recovery, especially according to the sectors, the housing sector. And we know sometimes our political directorates do not like to have policies because they may not want to adhere to it. They want to be able to make that decision on who gets what and when. So these are some of the issues that I see as biggest challenges in implementing the resilient recovery.
Thank you very much for your interventions, panelists. Now let's look now at in what ways has your country, your respective countries, leveraged regional cooperation to improve recovery processes and outcomes, and what do you think is needed to better leverage these types of interinstitutional or regional mechanisms? Again, I'm gonna shift the order now, and I'm gonna go from Michelle coming back towards me. So Michelle, we're gonna start with you. You ended, but we're gonna start with you on this particular question.
No problem. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as a democratic government and country, we have developed partnerships regionally, internationally, and through bilaterals in particular, and to establish mechanisms in the region. And if you know how, I'm sure some of the islands operate the same, we are all our brother's keeper. We are one in the region. If something happens to one of us, everybody comes on board to support that particular island. We are also a member state of CARICOM, which is a Caribbean community, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and a participating state of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, which was established in 1991 and given overall mandate of disaster risk reduction for its participating states. Now, all of these organs at the regional level contribute to recovery and resilience building in our region. And I want to highlight in particular our relationship and partnership with CDEMA through the Regional Response Mechanism. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of CDEMA. But this unit has done a lot in terms of supporting the states in the recovery planning through development of model national recovery framework, national policy evacuation plan, the comprehensive disaster management policy strategy and legislation framework, and of course the resilience framework and pathway, which clearly outlines the resilience, building resilience on the 5 pillars: the social protection, enhancing economic opportunities, safeguarding infrastructure, environmental protection and operational readiness. Now, we have worked with CDEMA and the World Bank through the region in terms of looking at recovery audits, and let's stress the importance of sectoral recovery planning across the islands. Now, we utilize these regional agencies to kind of leverage our partnership to look at capacity building and emergency response and to actually drive for recovery funds. In particular, CDEMA would have liaised with our partners during the volcanic eruption or during events to deploy response teams in country, pre-disaster, during the event, and post-disaster. And we saw that happening in 2021 in particular. Once our volcanic alert was raised to orange, the entire regional mechanism was actually activated to support St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we were having regional meetings weekly by, every week to really see how we were planning to support St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we had teams that were deployed to St. Vincent, CARICOM Disaster Relief Unit, and they were a blessing during the eruption because they established mobile units, logistics support with the World Food Programme, provided support to the NEOC and logistics support. Also, following the eruption in 2021, CDEMA and the OECSM would have really acted on our behalf as a country to receive funds to support our recovery efforts, looking at upgrading of emergency shelters, capacity building in the NEOC, strengthening of the agricultural sector, which was one that was decimated in the northern part of the island, community resilience, and the PDNA is a post-disaster assessment and a host of others. And just to add here, and the OECS also has leveraged funds to support us on the prepositioning of equipment, debris management, response, mobility issues. And as a region too, in terms of our partnerships across the islands, we have a program, not so much a program, it's a gentleman's agreement where the Prime Minister for Dominica can call St. Vincent and say, hey, I need 2 or 3 Bailey bridges, can you lend me? And whenever we get again, we will replace those. So that's the kind of partnership we have within the region. And what is needed? One, I would say a tried and tested regional response mechanism like what we have. It's not perfect, but it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Over to you, Vasiti.
Thank you, Moderator. So for us in the Pacific, sorry, Mafua, I'm going to jump you here. You probably have nothing to say after this. So we have the 2050 Blue Pacific Strategy, which was a document that was endorsed with all the head of state for 21 Pacific Island country. So this 2050 strategy really outlines where the Pacific is heading in terms of the different aspects, economic. Also, one of the thematic area in there is climate change and disaster. And believe me, when I tell you this, I had to fight for disaster to be included with climate change when they were still drafting the 2050 Blue Strategy. So glad that it made it through, but also just informing the forum that there is a guide document that Pacific Island countries are heading towards, which was endorsed by our leaders, and that's the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific. We also have the Pacific Resilient Partnership. So this is trying to really bring together both climate change as well as DRR practitioners across the Pacific. So this Pacific Resilient Partnership, under the guidance of both SPC and Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, really outlines some of the key governance. For myself, Fiji and DMO, we currently co-chair the governance component with Solomon Islands. And one of the key documents that we managed to release during COVID-19 was the legal mapping process of emergency management for health. And even though it was purely handled by health, but because we were the chair for that particular governance thematic area, we were able to contribute in that space. So Pacific Resilient Partnership is another element or another window that you can come in to support some of these initiatives. And then further down, maybe in the Mafua and I level, there's a lot of discussions around Pacific deployment. Fiji is fortunate that we've deployed to Tonga with the volcanic eruption. Last year during TC, I forgot the name of the cyclone. That's what happens when there's a lot of cyclone, you forget the names. In Vanuatu, Fiji was also deployed to Vanuatu to help support that mechanism, response. We were also fortunate to have deployed across to New Zealand for TC Gabriel. So one of the big lessons learned that we got out of this was, partners, we need our level of engagement between the disaster management practitioners in country. It's easier when you bring, so for example, if Fiji goes to Tonga or Tonga comes to Fiji, the relationship building is easier for us to integrate and therefore consistency in the work that we do. What we see during a response becomes a struggle is when we are inundated with overseas experts coming in and not understanding really well the scope of how we operate, and therefore burdening the very people that should they be assisting. So in terms of capacity building, really, don't just come and build capacity, but build capacity at the regional level and also have funding to support deployment within regional. So Tonga to Fiji, Fiji to Tonga, Fiji to Vanuatu, as of what's happening now. So that's something that we are pushing as well through the Secretariat of the Pacific Community. And then I guess the final project is the Pacific Island Alliance Emergency Management, which really covers around what I just said earlier. So there are documents, there are processes that are in place that needs to be strengthened that we are moving towards. Last but not the very least, Fiji hosted the inaugural Pacific Disaster Reduction Ministerial meeting 2 years ago. So out of that Pacific Ministerial DRR meeting, a 90 declaration which all the Pacific ministers had agreed to have these discussions biannually as a build-up to the APMC that will happen this year in Philippines. So these are different platforms that exist regionally that we align ourselves to when it comes to disaster management. Sorry, Mafua.
Thank you. Thank you, Vasiti. I think I'll just speak from Tonga only because Vasiti covered the whole of the Pacific here. So Tonga leverages regional cooperation for recovery by sharing best practices, as Vasiti mentioned, pooling resources and engaging in joint training, as Vasiti mentioned about that one. The other area is improve information sharing, infrastructure development, and policy harmonization. Contribute to a more cohesive approach. As Vasiti mentioned, is that for Tonga needs to strengthen the regional framework, as Vasiti mentioned about the, and also the investment in communication infrastructure. Vasiti mentioned the ongoing capacity building and community engagement, sustainable financing mechanisms, and flexibility in adapting to evolving challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And over to you, Robert.
Yeah, within the Indian Ocean, we form part of the Indian Ocean Commission. And as part of the commission, there is an ongoing deliberations in terms of setting some sort of response mechanism within the region. It is yet to come to light. However, there are programs being run by the IOC, and this year the emphasis will be on communications and sensitization of the various populations of the region. At the next level, we have the SADC, of which we are a member, and we've been engaged, and there's the Regional Emergency Operations Center in Mozambique, and Seychelles is yet to be a signatory to that. But I suppose shortly it'll be there. As I said earlier, we're not sort of a disaster-prone nation per se, but with the World Bank, we've worked on the creation of the National Integrated Emergency Management Plan. The operationalization of the plan started last year, and we're making headway. Maybe there's one thing that needs to be brought about is that we've had legislation, the National Disaster Risk Management Act, since 2014. But it's only 2 years back that we have started to really implement the Act. We consider the Act a wonderful document, but then for the reason that we're not used to disasters and people have not taken it seriously till now. But now with the climate change issue, I believe the nation has started to realize that we have to wake up to certain realities. And the events of last month has proven that, yes, disasters does occur, and we have to be ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, our next questions. Due to SID's geographic features, coastal areas are particularly vulnerable to water-related impacts from sea level rise, storm surge, and tsunamis. And of course, we've heard from many of you the complexities inherent in small size and limited land space. What are the strategies, therefore, that you are applying, thinking of applying, and processes that will aid your efforts to build back better in the face of these limiting constraints? I'll start with you, Robert.
Okay. Thank you. In Seychelles, we have basically two types of terrain. We have what we call the granitic islands, which are basically islands rising from the shore right up to a few thousand meters. And we have flatlands. There's the Maldives type of islands. So it's basically 50-50 in terms of spread. But most of the population will be concentrated on the granitic islands. So the concerns are basically coastal erosion, sea level rise and all. So what are the approaches? We've got soft engineering approaches, which is basically timber piling, sand dune management, and coastal revegetation, and the hard engineering process of rock armoring. Seychelles is a touristic sort of location. The sad thing is that tourists will come for the beaches, and because of the effect of degradation, you find that most beaches are ending up being sort of rocky outcrops just because of the rock armoring that is taking over, and it's a sad scenario. So we are also in the promotion of climate resilient technology, which is basically moving towards renewable energy of wind, solar, and photovoltaic applications onto the grid. And we're into the restoration of marine ecosystem, reef rehabilitation. And finally, there's a move now, and discussions are underway to integrate climate change adaptation into disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Over to you.
Addressing the vulnerability of coastal areas to sea level rise, storm surges, and tsunamis involves constructing resilient infrastructure, implementing strict zoning and land use regulations, fostering community engagement, and restoring coastal ecosystems. Is strengthening early warning system, adopting climate resilient agricultural practices, and providing training on disaster preparedness are vital as well. Additionally, exploring innovative financing solutions, engaging in international cooperation for resources, and integrating water-related risk reduction into national development plans contribute to building resilience and mitigating future threats in the recovery process. Thank you.
Thank you. Vasiti?
Thank you, Moderator. Just to add on to what Mafua had said, what he shared is similar as well to Fiji. But I guess just two things to add on to that. One is risk-informed development. This is something that we still struggle to get leaders to recognize that we need to really mainstream it into our development phase. What we are now seeing is a lot of our coastal areas that have never flooded before are now being flooded. A small amount of rain would flood this area. And so when we track back to what's really happened over the years, it's development. And we can't stop development. We need development to happen in order to boost economic activity. But we can influence development to be risk-informed. And so this is the approach that we are, we are trying to advocate to our leaders. And I probably like to share to our partners and donors who are also here. One of the ways that you can support us is when you do give funding or loans across to small island state government, you could actually put a clause to say, we would like to see the interventions of risk-informed development into your program in order for us to release this loan. So this is something that I'm also doing when I do talk to our partners. If they are trying to help us as well to try and advocate for risk-informed developments by influencing higher level through financial support to say that, okay, we can give you X amount of money, but we need to see that this amount of risk-informed development is happening, or this particular section is undertaken before X amount of money is further released. So this is something I'd really like to encourage our partners to explore. Last but not the very least, in terms of coastal inundation for Fiji, once all other avenues have been exhausted, it's relocation. So we have a relocation SOP where we try and move people to inland. NDMO has done 6 relocations. We're currently doing 1 right now, which were impacted in 2021 from TC Yasa. The downside about this particular community and why it took us long to relocate them is because they no longer have any inherited land that belongs to them or their ancestors. And so government had to look for alternative land or ask other landowners to surrender their land for them to actually use. So the cultural aspect kicks in as well. So these are a few things that we have that we complement the work that we do with regards to those that are affected with coastal hazards.
Thank you very much. Again, some very important issues emerging there, the tensions, the land access and tensions, and also some of the political issues inherent in managing some of those tensions for sure. Michelle, shall we hear from you?
As an island state, 32 islands in case, our population range from a few hundred to over 80,000 on mainland. We are witnessing an unprecedented loss of our coastal areas, mainly from storm surges, wave action, sea level rise. We are talking about up to 4 cricket, I don't know if you're familiar with cricket, the game of cricket, 4 cricket pitches, maybe football or soccer fields, 2 to 4. But the reality is, the next 20 to 50 years, some of our coastal communities will no longer exist, maybe sooner, because we are seeing the impacts of climate change being accelerated over the last few years. Now, there are several approaches that my government and institutions have employed to build back better and mitigate against future threats in our coastline. We have a range of activities from the hard mitigation measures of seawalls in the northeastern part of mainland St. Vincent, and we have been building some seawalls there since around 2021-22. We're extending that in 2024 because a lot of our coastlines and a lot of our coastal communities are being bombarded by the sea wave action. Is this the best solution? I will just throw that out here, because we have to have a mixture of the hard and the soft measures. But a lot of this infrastructure, the sea defenses are really being done to safeguard our coastal communities, our road networks, which are sometimes it's the only way in and out of communities all around the island. So we have a host of partners that we work with. We have been also redesigning our roads to go more inland instead of along the coast, and redesigning for more severe events in maybe 1 in 50-year flood or 1 in a 100-year event. And this is all homegrown. All our local engineers, they do that re-engineering themselves, and they really have learned from the repeated failures of roads being built and rebuilt and having the same problems over the years when another flood or another sea surge or wave action come and take them out again. We have done the housing rehabilitation and relocation, especially from the coastal communities. Every year we have coastal inundation in some form or the other, maybe not in a sustained way sometimes. But since 2002, we have been looking at the housing rehabilitation, and most of these funds are actually loans that our government have had to undertake. We have the Tsunami Ready program. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, and you do it within your own islands. That is being led by the IOC UNESCO, where we do a lot of the soft things, the public information education. We do the annual drills, the carry wave exercises, the tsunami hazard mapping, and the signage. In 2020, it was our first community of Union Island, one of the islands, the most southern island belonging in our island chain, that was designated as tsunami ready. And last year we had 10 communities within a parish being tsunami ready, and we continue to work with our partners, Red Cross, USAID, SEDEMA, etc., to really push that whole readiness of our coastal community. I want to highlight though 2 initiatives. Did you ask me that question, Ron?
Go ahead. No,
okay.
Go ahead.
Because I know they were tied in terms of what we are doing to really scale up our. You want me to go there? Or?
No, please.
Scale up our initiatives. There are 2 initiatives that have been done in particular. Well, I mentioned one in terms of our coastal communities. We have in Union Island, our southernmost island, the restoration of what we call the Ashton Lagoon. It's an area that a project was failed in the 80s when the government would have given a big investor the lands to redevelop, and it was mangrove lands, mangrove and swamps. So need I say more what will happen? So that whole area, the environment was really devastated, and the project failed, and the people of Union Island actually kind of started demonstrating and basically wanted to do the whole environmental part of it. So they partnered with the NGOs. It wasn't a government fund, they partnered with NGOs and we built that area, planting over 3,000 red mangroves in the ecosystem. It's really thriving. If you see that if you see that mangrove now compared to what it was 15 years ago, it's just amazing. So that is a really soft project that they can do to really look at reduce the wave action, because that whole area was dead. they became dead and the waves were actually coming in and have started affecting the roads and the community. So that's one example I wanted to really highlight in terms of what the initiatives that you can do to scale up using the soft measures from that whole project, the mangroves and rebuilding the coastal communities.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think you've been kind enough to speak to the second question. So we'll go to Vasiti for this in terms of what examples of good practice for inclusive recovery that have emerged since 2015, and which of these can be scaled up for national, international level. We've just heard one from Michelle, which is really looking at resuscitating the mangroves and how that has really improved the living conditions for the people of Union Island. In your context, what would you point to since 2015?
What to say? I guess, I'm going to go back to relocation, mainly because that's, for us, the end solution. There's just no other way around rehabilitating that particular community. And so, as I said earlier, the ones that are currently in the process of being relocated, when we send our geotechnical team to go and inspect their land, the conclusion of their investigation was this land is no longer safe for them to inhabit. Right? And the sad thing about this is not only is it no longer safe, they no longer have any more land within their inheritance that they could move to, which would make our relocation process faster. So from 2015 to now, what we normally do after every disaster, we conduct after-action review. And this after-action review really highlights some of the key policies or the structures or documents that needs to be revised. So while that's at the project level, I think at the national level, we have implemented risk-informed development in a few of our programs. We've reviewed Fiji's building code, and I shared that a bit earlier in my interventions. And we are very strategic in our approach when it comes to disaggregated data. And this is very important because we saw the need for us to intervene when we were responding to COVID because the needs of people were not really attended to, because the data that were coming in was not so detailed that would allow us to respond effectively. And so in this case, Ministry of Health realized, no, we need to bring back disaster managers to come and assist us with our response. So we changed the whole template to ensure that data that are coming in are addressing all aspects of response. And so re-emphasizing the importance of disaggregated data and ensuring that the information that are coming in are to a standard that we can use and improve our services to the people. I guess last but not the very least, community-based disaster risk training. This is something that we do as part of our build-up for cyclone season. Cyclone season in the Pacific is from November to April. So anything before November, this is where we really go out and do operational readiness check. So through our NGOs and our CSOs, because we don't have the time, let alone the manpower to go out and do all this training, we work through our CSOs and NGOs. We set the standard on community-based disaster risk training, and then our NGOs go out and conduct training at the community level. I was asked earlier today, how about disability? How do you inform disability if there's a disaster? During that training at the community level, there is a flag pole process that happens. The different flag shows different signs for those with disability. And so this is something we have because we don't have reliable infrastructure, let alone utility in our rural community. And so we resort to flag bearing to ensure that the messages are consistent right throughout, also inclusive of those with disability. So that's something that we've really come out strong after 2015, working with our CSOs and NGOs to implement one of government's key priority. I guess, sorry, the last one that I also wanted to add on is we also established a Fiji Business Disaster Resilience Council. So the Fiji Business Disaster Resilience Council is the component where we link up to our businesses when it comes to disaster, and vice versa. So one of the ways that we are supporting them now is we're hiring an individual that will help them develop their earthquake SOP, their tsunami SOP. As you all know, the way they respond, businesses, the way they respond is very different from the way we respond. And so having this dedicated person to work with our businesses to develop target approach SOPs to meet their needs, this is something that we are working towards, and we hope we will complete this by mid of next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. For Tonga, since 2015, I think I'll put one examples of inclusive recovery practices include community-led programs, empowering local decision-making, like the islands and village level DRM committees, robust social protection systems, targeting vulnerable populations, the gender-inclusive approaches, recognizing diverse needs, the public-private partnerships, mobilizing resources, risk-informed decision-making, prioritizing interventions, technology for inclusive communication and data collection, education and training programs, building local skills, and legal and institutional reforms, ensuring equal access. And I guess that the Tonga's recovery and the preparedness efforts are strengthened by the robust cluster system under the new Disaster Risk Management Act 2021. That's ensuring effective coordinations and proactive physical reforms, including the National Emergency National Emergency Fund, contribute to risk reductions. The other thing is that the Tonga prioritizes strengthening early warning systems through partnerships for people-centered multi-hazard warning systems. So the emphasizing community resilience. So Tonga underscores that inclusive recovery to ensure that the well-being of every member prevent leaving anyone behind. But I guess I need to conclude that Tonga's recovery preparedness is not just a response to a single disaster. It is an investment in our future resilience and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Robert, you close the segment of the Q&A.
When we speak about inclusive recovery, in Seychelles we have a very specific scenario. We're a population of 100,000 only, and we have about 15,000 expatriate workers. And being a tourist destination, and at one time we'll have several thousand tourists in country. And when it comes to the cruise ship season, you might have 2 massive cruise ships in port, and the area, the islands are basically flooded with tourists. So whatever we do in terms of disaster risk management, recovery and all, we have to take into account the presence of these foreigners on our land. And following the explosion in last month, which was at the center of the industrial area, and all businesses within, 90% of businesses into the industrial estate went up into ashes. And the big challenge now is, what do you do with the 6,000-7,000 expatriate workers that are still there, but government is still sort of dealing with the issue. and sort of putting a stop to employers wanting to sort of get rid of them and getting them back to the country. So those are one of the main issues that Seychelles as a nation needs to sort of plan for in future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we have roughly about, let's say, 6 minutes to open the floor to our audience present or online. So do we have any request from the floor to pose questions to our esteemed panelists? I see no. I see one hand at the back.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Krioning Chiswaka. I'm from DRC Congo, and I'm a PhD student here in Kansai University. My question is, I think we listen very, very good practices for what was done by the small islands. It was many good practice to mitigate risk. My question is about to understand. There is a kind of practices that talk about sharing risk about among stakeholders in Pacific, because I think that even in Africa or in other parts of the world, most of the time people thinking about getting help from international organizations, and every time this help didn't help too much. But I want to know, there is a kind of initiative that sharing risk among stakeholders that has been done in small islands as a whole or in each country. This is my question.
Does any one of the panelists want to respond to that question?
Thank you. I'll take that, moderator. From Fiji side, just reflecting on sharing risks. We were talking about early recovery. We developed early recovery framework specifically for cyclone, because we are used to cyclone. And in that early recovery framework, it's not just the way NDMO thinks it will improve, but it's a whole of government. So we don't write what will work well with agriculture. The template is shared with agriculture for them to actually highlight what they have, what will work for them, and what's their plan for the remaining 6 months, the budget that they have versus the gap that they have in order to reach what they are trying to achieve for the first 6 months after a disaster impact. So that's something that we do so well. As I said, we do so well in cyclone, because in the Pacific we grew up with cyclone. It's something that I can attest to, that it becomes a struggle when it comes to flooding, because flooding is unprecedented. Just a small amount of rain is now causing a lot of havoc in Fiji. And so to develop a response or recovery plan specifically for flooding, that's an area that we're still trying to explore, but most importantly, explore using science, if you put it that way. And of course, then you have tsunami and volcano, which happens when it happens, but it doesn't take away the need that that we need to share the risks. So that's just a few that I have on my side.
Thank you.
Mafua?
I think for us it's the same as Fiji. Instead of a whole of a government approach, we put it in a way that it's a whole of a country approach, looking at the head of the states all the way to head of the government, all the way to the local, all the way down to the youth. Thank you.
So we have a question from our online participants, which I'm going to pose to the panelists, and if you feel compelled, then please do respond. The question is, have you seen a change in the culture in either the government or the communities once you have leveraged this sort of regional approaches that you've spoken of earlier? Has it led to any change in government's views, approach, maybe in sustaining these regional institutions and approaches? Any reflections? Anyone. It's open. It's open to any of the panelists who might have, thoughts on this. Having leveraged this sort of regional mechanisms that you've spoken to, has it led to any change in terms of how governments look at these platforms, these regional platforms, or these regional mechanisms, or the culture of how the local communities behave? Michelle, you want to go ahead?
I'll give it a go. Probably changing culture at the local level, especially for flooding. We have several communities that traditional, once there's heavy rain, that they flood. Unfortunately, sometimes they do not react until the flood waters are right in their yard. But we have seen the changes over the years, especially most of the coastal communities. There are several communities now. Once you give the early warning that there's going to be storm surge, they actually move. They do not wait. In the past, we didn't have that. So you're seeing some cultural changes as we go along. At the regional level, in terms of things that have happened to really propel the region to take a new direction. We have seen it especially since 2015, 2017, after Erica in Dominica, and Maria and Irma in 2017 in particular. We saw some big shifts. We have been at the regional institutions, CDIMA. We have some new players in the region too that we are resurfacing, such as the IOM, International Office for Migration, where we would have had large movements of people. So then CDIMA and the regional institutions had to rethink the approach to even displacement, where we had large internal displacements and displacement across islands. We have persons living in BVI, British Virgin Islands. We have persons living in Dominica, and the countries, our islands, we had to open our doors to welcome back our people who are living in these islands, or even welcome those persons from those islands who wanted to continue their education, etc. So we have seen different shifts in terms of the policies that we now have to employ to deal with these changes. One good thing for us is that the OECS integration did work in terms of movement of people across OECS territories and British Virgin Islands, but we're not seeing that in some of the other islands. So these are some of the lessons that we are seeing, and I just wanted to touch on something for the PhD student in terms of sharing risk among the islands. You can use Montserrat as an example in terms of the volcanic eruption, St. Vincent as a volcanic eruption. We have the lessons learned, and we meet annually as disaster practitioners to really share our experiences. And we constantly chat with each other in terms of our sharing our experiences and the risk that we face in the countries, and we learn from each other as we go along.
Thank you, Michelle. And of course, certainly from an insurance perspective, the sovereign insurance pooling is one way in terms of the governments. Governments across different regions globally are getting into this issue of sharing some of the risk. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our panelists. I don't think we have enough time for another question. I think they've done a fantastic job in trying to navigate through these tough questions, I would say, and they've really brought out. Before I summarize, can we get a round of applause for our panelists, please? Thank you. Thank you. I think they deserve that. No, we've heard certainly a lot of the challenges associated with access, distance between islands, distance within islands in terms of communities, and efforts to engage them, issues around institutional capacities, and measures being applied to try to build those capacities, including through regional cooperation mechanism, the challenges associated with policies, whether they are adaptive, and whether or not there is the sort of resource base to be able to deal with these complexities that SIDS face, particularly when we get into issues around having to consider relocation, land acquisition, the cultural related issues with having to uproot individuals from their livelihoods and their communities. The big issue of fragmentation or compartmentalization, which seems to be driven by the financing, often external. And it raises questions around, how do we engage in a local community, in a country where leadership is paramount and should be reposed in the governments to be able to drive these processes. Delays in terms of implementing these recovery projects in coastal areas brought about by human resource shortage. I think the issues of carrying capacity, in the space. I heard Vasiti again bringing up this issue of relocation, and what we didn't hear explicitly, but we heard implicitly, was the requirement perhaps for relocation off islands into other territories as a possibility that faces SIDS in cases where you have limited land areas in which to develop, and the tensions associated with that. We've heard from our colleagues issues around the importance of strict zoning and land use regulation in managing these limited spaces. The importance of risk-informed development. What is it? What does it entail? How do we incentivize this? And of course, we can find examples in the Pacific for sure, where they have been, sort of pushing forward on this understanding. Coastal protective infrastructure. What we would have also wanted to hear is a little bit about the vertical resettlement. How are we considering that in the future, where we're losing limited land spaces and where we have to accommodate population within these spaces? So quite a bit, a lot to parse through, and not enough time to really take it on. I think it forms the basis of a future thesis for engagement in terms of what's happening in the context of SIDS and how we deal with managing land mass and also dealing with the financing environment and the fragmentation that it also drives. Thank you again, panelists. Happy to have been your moderator and to hear from you and to learn from you and to share in the discourse. Thank you, and over to you.